Hi everyone, my name's Caroline Hutchinson. I work at Nihon University College of Economics, and as part of this role I've experienced the challenge of teaching and designing a graduation seminar for the first time. These are known in Japanese as Zemi, and as if that wasn't enough, also throw in the challenge of emergency remote teaching. So today I'd like to talk about these challenges and what I did to overcome them, and hopefully offer insights for other teachers designing Zemi or similar English medium academic courses. Welcome to early 2020. I'm beginning to plan my Zemi course in earnest, and I'm finding it challenging to identify the assumptions, expectations and constraints of this kind of course that's often described as a Japanese institution, uniquely Japanese. I'm aware that it involves mentoring students to research an academic specialism and in most cases to produce a graduation thesis. However, there's been little research and writing in English on the Zemi, and also from the perspective of an outsider who hasn't gone through the Zemi process at university. And I was also given very few specific parameters in terms of what should go on in the classroom. However, it's likely with English medium instruction growing in Japan that there will be more non-Japanese professors supervising. So I hope I can demystify this institution a little in this presentation. I'll introduce my faculty's Semisystem. So in students' first year, they are not affiliated with the Zemi, but in the second semester, they are introduced to the system. Teachers hold information sessions, and then students apply to join a Zemi, and they are selected by either interviews or tests. In my case, I hold interviews. I assess their willingness to communicate in English and their motivation for choosing the course. In all cases, the fourth year involves a graduation thesis or equivalent body of work. What I was less clear on was the distinction between students' second and third year. So I decided to separate them in this way. The year 2 will be basic skills and group work. Year 3 will involve more research, report writing and academic skills such as citation and referencing. And this system differs from university to university. One of the biggest differences is whether it is a 3-year or a 2-year Zemi program. So we have 3 years. Now I'd like to talk about 3 challenges I faced when designing the Zemi. The first is that I knew I had 3 years of classroom content to plan, some expectation of extracurricular interaction as well, and no personal experience of going through the Zemi system. And besides the administrative side, there were few clear guidelines, or a lot of freedom, depending on which way you want to look at it. So I had many questions, and even questions like how many students should I recruit were generally met with, well, that's up to you. I did get some advice from colleagues, which was very helpful, but again, very keen to preserve my autonomy in designing my course. So it was hugely useful to be able to get together with people in a similar situation at CAMT Seoul in February 2020. And this presentation answered some of my basic questions. It established which other questions remain unanswered for most teachers, and collected the voices of practitioners who've had the experience of teaching Zemi. So this was hugely useful to me. The second challenge that I faced was perhaps a degree of imposter syndrome, or at least seeing myself in the role of an academic who leads a graduation seminar. I saw this as being somebody with a PhD, which I don't have, and a clearly defined specialism. I have dotted around a little bit. I have a degree in history, I have a master's in Japanese studies, and I have a TESOL qualification. So that makes me an expert in what exactly? Was the kind of thing running through my mind. And I was thinking, should I be assigning difficult textbook readings? Should I be pitching this as something akin to a graduation seminar in an English-speaking country? And eventually I chose the theme, Japan's relations with the world through history, which seemed to tie together the areas that I was able to talk about, but I still hesitated to teach it in the way that I would feel most comfortable with if it were a regular English medium course. The third challenge relates to mentorship and how to relate to the students in a social or pastoral sense. So my experience at university was very independent and involved one-on-one discussions with the professor. This has a number of advantages. Students can learn at their own pace, they can ask lots of questions, the tutor can adapt based on where the student is at, and knowledge is seen as contested. So rather than being teacher-centered, students are encouraged to defend and challenge positions. However, this is time intensive. I had 7 students, so was I going to meet with each of them twice in a 15-week semester? And the other element is that students have to do a lot of preparation for these sessions, on average around 15 hours for each, Ashwin finds, unlikely when my students have other classes. Another issue with this is that it can seem like an interrogation. And for students who don't feel they perform well in this kind of setting, it can lead to a loss of student confidence, which I absolutely didn't want. Additionally, I need to consider the different nature of mentorship in Japan and the specific role that the Zemi is held to play. So, for example, Zemi students often go on summer trips, Zemi gashku, where they might stay overnight and they might discuss topics or give presentations. I've heard that Zemi often provide introductions to companies for job hunting. They are certainly the point of contact at my university. We are asked to pass information on to students often. And this bonding element is held to be important in creating ties inside the classroom that enable group work to happen smoothly. Finally, I would need to consider that we were conducting most of this in the students' second language. So in terms of one-on-one tutorials, I wouldn't be expecting students to be able to keep up with the same level of work. So in February 2020, I've had some reassurance and input on some of the big questions surrounding the Zemi, thanks to the session at Cam TESOL and talking to colleagues. However, I still have a lot of concerns. I'm still kind of dragging my feet on the actual business of preparing when all of a sudden everything changed. And in March 2020, I began planning for what I hoped would be a short spell of emergency remote teaching. However, we are still fully online in September 2021. So this is now the 4th semester of the Zemi. Given the unusual situation, I basically had to set aside all of my fears and deep philosophical anxiety about what was a Zemi and get on with it. And in doing so, I basically fell back on my strengths. And I'd like to talk in the next slides about what I did and how the situation influenced course design, lesson design and pedagogy, interaction and assessment. And indeed, if it really influenced those things all that much. Now I'll talk about my goals for the Zemi. So starting with course design, I wanted to balance group work with independent research. And I also wanted to build in some dialogue, either one-on-one sessions where students could speak with me, or through student assignments, for example, commenting on student reflections. I also wanted student input on topics and student feedback on each other's presentations and research. I always asked for formative feedback, so what questions they had, what they would want to know more about. And we did this through Google Forms, which I think gives students time to think and doesn't put them on the spot so much. So we actually got some really interesting questions through using that. I also wanted to thread academic skills through, in addition to learning content. Coming on to pedagogy, I am basically a task-based learning teacher in the classroom as well. So I would be setting up projects or tasks with clear outcomes, suggested staging, and often a different role for each student. The important thing with online learning was to make sure that was as clear as possible before students went away and did the work asynchronously. In terms of interaction, I wanted to provide as much opportunity for group work as possible, especially because we were online and we weren't going socializing afterwards, but also to balance that with the opportunity to choose individual topics and conduct individual research. And I wanted to be able to establish and build on student knowledge, measure where they were at, as in a tutorial system. And to do that, we used a brainstorming method called KWL. So students thought of things they know about a topic, they want to know about a topic. And then once we'd studied the topic, the L is what have you learned during this topic. I also built in reflection because I wanted to know how students were getting on, but also because I wanted students to identify possible future avenues for research. And finally, assessment really focused on how deeply students engaged with the process, so including their reflection on what they learned and their analysis. And again, we focused on formative feedback, always with the intention of you're going to be writing a graduation thesis, so how will you do this better next time? Now I'll introduce the basic semester outline. So you can see the orange here are the group work or basic information sessions, and then the red is students' individual research and topics. So in the red shaded classes, these are largely one-on-one consultations, quite short, but they give me a chance to explain the written feedback that I've given to students. So these are kind of like mini tutorial sessions. And in the first year of the Zemi, students give a research presentation at the end of the semester. In the second year of the Zemi, they give a research presentation and submit a report. So we spend some time studying report writing in that second year of the Zemi. That leaves the rest of the semester for topics. Each one we spend 3 class periods on. And looking in more detail, the first lesson is what do you know and sharing what you know. This example is about Japan-China relations. In the second lesson, we do some kind of lesson from me where I bring in some source of information. In the case of Japan and China, there's a very interesting Gendong joint survey where they ask Japanese people about China, Chinese people about Japan, and you can look at graphs of how it's changed over time. So I have students report that data to each other, practicing academic skills there. And then in the third lesson of these topic intros, we have an academic reading circle, which I will explain more on the next slide. And we repeat this pattern 3 times. So there are 3 academic reading circles in the course of a semester. After 2 classes of introduction to a topic, I ask students to conduct an academic reading circle discussion. And I'd like to thank Tyson Seaburn for making his book on this freely available during the first year of the pandemic. It was most helpful. I'm sure many of you are familiar with reading circles for the extensive reading classroom. Students prepare their impression of a character or their summary of a plot and so on. This is the same idea, but more focused on academic topics, so the roles are different. So I start by assigning a central text, which all students will read. These are chosen based on recent news about the topic. So, for example, last year's Japan-China text related to how Trump's trade war with China had affected Japan-China relations. And the roles students are asked to prepare are the leader, who summarizes, asks comprehension questions, asks discussion questions, the highlighter, who explains key vocabulary and analyzes how the author's opinion is conveyed through their choice of words. The contextualizer picks up people, places, events that are used in the text but not fully explained, and goes away and finds out more information about them. The connector picks up things that connect to their own lives, things that connect to something they learned in another class, things that connect to another news article. So, for example, on the Japan-China issue, students found articles about Japan-Taiwan relations, Taiwan-China relations, and so on. And then the visualizer is looking for visual information, maps, graphs, charts, videos, images that can aid student understanding of the topic. And this has worked, I think, very well in the class. Students have a clearly defined role, which means the more reticent students have a space to contribute, even on Zoom, which can tend to make some students fade into the background. There's autonomous work involved because they complete it individually, but I ask them to compare with the person who's performed the same role at the beginning of class so they can confirm each other's ideas. It includes opportunities for critical thinking, for identifying information that isn't clear, and for asking questions. And at the end of it, I ask students to reflect and summarize their discussion, which means I also have an opportunity to comment on and respond, and also share what groups have learned by doing the discussion. I'm now just over halfway through my first 3 years of teaching the Zemi, so I'd like to quickly sum up what I see as some of the successes and challenges that are yet to come. So first of all, my students have been very engaged, which is largely down to the students, but also suggests that my course is broadly speaking in line with what they expected. I've been very happy with academic reading circles. They give a good mix of independence, clear roles, and interaction. Academic skills, students have been generally receptive to. And there's been some student input on topics, less so the topics we study as a class, but some very interesting topics chosen by the students for their own research. In terms of future challenges, I have completely dodged the social element and pastoral element. We have been asked not to socialize with students outside the classroom. We haven't been in the classroom. So the kind of side channel of teacher, I have this problem, hasn't really been there. And I hope that that means my students are all okay. But it hasn't been an issue at all, really, during the online learning period. Other challenges going forward are, of course, the graduation thesis, always a challenge when students are producing work in their second language. And I have heard that especially as the fourth year sets in, students are busy with job hunting, it becomes increasingly difficult to motivate them to actually come to class. In conclusion, if asked to teach a Zemi, my advice would be find out what you can from the university, from foreign colleagues, colleagues with overseas experience, the wider academic community, and after that, use the freedom to your advantage. You've been asked to teach the course because colleagues and the institution believe that you can, and students choose to study with you because they want to study with you. So it's a space where you can put your strengths and your interests to work and work with a small class that is willing and, generally speaking, engaged. So enjoy it. It really is a privilege in many ways. Thank you very much for listening.